And the next Workstream debrief is from Crispin Reed, who is, there you go, an industry polymath. He's founder of Skyscraper, and he's harvested some very interesting perspectives from next-gen potential ad folk, or maybe not. Crispin, the stage is yours. Thank you.
There is no skill in advertising. Thought I'd hit you straight between the eyes, straight from the off. Not my words, the words from 3 different students in 3 different in-depth research interviews, verbatim. And as somebody who enjoyed his career, the first half of my career in advertising, I find that quite a sort of salutary indictment. And indeed, another 17-year-old said, "The industry is like a band playing the same 4 notes. There are no original scores anymore." So buckle up. The takeoff might be a bit bumpy, but I assure you, in the spirit of Nick and Brian saying, please, let's make this positive, I will end on some ideas from the horses' mouths. When I conducted this research, I extracted the issues, but then I put it back to the research participants and said, okay, you've told me the problems, now help me with some solutions to bring back to everybody here today. So, in terms of what we did, our workstream thought, we've got a good collective opinion, but why don't we, in the spirit of good advertising, bring the consumer voice into the room? So I interviewed in depth 32 students, ages 13 to 22, 23. There were 6 13-year-olds. You might sort of think, well, that's a bit young, but I was actually quite interested in what they had to say, and boy, did they have some really interesting insights. But then most of it was focused on 17, 18-year-olds in sixth form, about to enter university. Not all of them. Some of them were considering degree apprenticeships, going out to work. And thanks to the universities highlighted here on the right, my alma mater, University of Dundee, Edinburgh and Napier, Lancaster, Leeds and Nottingham Trent University, very grateful for them giving us access to their students. The schools I promised not to mention, but we spoke to students from state and also independent schools. So a pretty good mix. I think qualitatively, a sample size of 32 is pretty decent. I'll come on to talk about what next right at the end. Quantitatively, thanks to Kevin May, who sadly can't be here today, he's on business in America, but Kevin, who's part of the workstream from the Sticks company, he, through his quantitative platform, MindLoad, we're right in the middle of doing a quant survey, translating the insights and hypotheses, trying to put sort of quantitative numbers on them. So I hope that as one of the next actions, I will be able to share with this group and beyond some numbers to back up some of the qualitative insights that we've got. In true spirit of doing a qualitative research debrief, here's a recap of the discussion flow. This was, broadly speaking, and if anybody's interested, I'll happily share the semi-structured interview questions, but this is broadly what I covered off with them. Starting out, what's your education journey? I just wanted to understand and also make them feel relaxed, telling me about how they'd got to where they'd got to, particularly for the university students who were coming towards possibly the end of their education experience, and what they liked and disliked topic-wise and their experiences in education, and then really getting into the nub of it. What were their career aspirations? And not prompting them with advertising. They didn't, by the way, know that I was, if you like, representing the advertising industry before I started the interviews. But towards the end, I revealed I was on behalf of the advertising industry and therefore was intrigued why, and this is what happened, not one of them spontaneously mentioned the advertising industry as a potential career, for reasons which I hope will become clear. And then, as I say, last but not least, I said, that's fine, you've given me the journey, you know the issue that I'm here to talk to you about, please share some ideas. And I've got 10 ideas right at the very end to share. In terms of also I'm very grateful to careers advisors and a couple of course leaders. And in fact, kind of breaking news, I was chatting to another academic, because I work with a couple of universities, and I was chatting to them, and I gave her a bit of a heads up on some of the insights, and she said, oh, that's really interesting. You want to read this quantitative survey that we, the university, have done, and it completely corroborates what you're about to hear. So I don't want to suffer from confirmation bias, but it was reassuring at one level to hear that. Quite frankly, I'm open-minded. If it had contradicted what I'd found, I'd have shared that with you today as well. But with the discussions I had with the careers advisors from different universities and also course directors, I focused on this side and getting their perspective on what they thought the career aspirations of their students were. And I've distilled it for the purpose of today into 4 M's. These are money, morality, I took a bit of poetic license with the third one, imagination, and marketing. So let me talk about the first one, money. And this is really quite a surprising one to many people that I've spoken to after doing these interviews in kind of casual conversations, when I've said to them, okay, what do you think the number one thing that students are looking for in their careers? And yeah, sure, they come back with, well, I want to work for a company with purpose, and I want balance in my life. But the number one thing dominating across all 32 interviews, to different shades, was money. And actually, when I talked to them and said, talk to me more, explain this, it made perfect sense. For the university students and even for the sixth formers going into university who know what's coming, they're carrying a lot of student debt. More than that, they're hearing on the media and from politicians day in, day out about the cost of living crisis. And in fact, if anybody saw the ITV news last night, 10 o'clock news, I don't know if Starling were involved, but they interviewed a group of young women playing seven-a-side football. And first up was the cost of living crisis. 2022 ONS data said that 42% of marriages, and we've talked about bank accounts lasting longer than marriages, 42% of UK families divorced. And put aside the emotional fissures, positive or negative, the economic fissures they are very aware of, and there were a group of students who've experienced that. They've also experienced, to quite a large degree, redundancy with their mothers, fathers, relatives, and they know the impact and the shockwaves that's led to that. And lastly, when I talk to them, they say, don't talk to me about buying a house. I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to rent a house when I leave. And you'll see a verbatim coming up from one of the students at a northern university, basically saying, and this was echoed with other students who are at university up north, who might be from London and the south, I'm not returning home because I'm not sure I can afford to. So, money is a big one. And just to illustrate that, 4 verbatims that I pulled out, and I have reams and reams of verbatims I'd happily share with anybody who's having trouble getting to sleep maybe at night. But these 4 really typify it. I will need financial predictability, said a year 12 from an independent school. This is quite shocking, I think. It's going to be a lot harder in 30 years' time. I need to earn money to prepare. They are thinking 15, 20, 30 years out. Yeah, of course they're living for the day, but when you get into talking in depth to them about their careers, they have these sorts of timelines. You need to put your head down and earn enough. And as I've said, imagine staying up north because it's cheaper. And by the way, and I'm going to come on to talk about segmentation, generally speaking, I would say, there is a group that is willing to, what I would say, consort with the devil. And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to talk about work-life balance, they will happily, to this point about get your head down and earn enough, they will say, yeah, I'm willing to do 14, 16 hours a day for the 15 years once I've graduated if it means I can accumulate a sufficient nest egg to provide some security for later in life, because who knows what's going to happen. Now, that's not all of them, but it's a reasonable group. And yes, there were other aspects. Once you kind of got the money out of the way, they said, yeah, of course I want to work in a nice environment with a good culture, something we've heard about earlier. I want to enjoy, expand, leverage my skills, maybe earn new skills, explore careers. By the way, that reminds me, topping the list of potential career paths alongside investment banking and law for some of the students. I appreciate that's not all of them, particularly for the creative students I talk to. But the civil service trumps the advertising industry. Why? Because it's perceived, and we all know government departments get cut, you know, those conversations are going on right now, but they perceive the civil service as being a pretty safe and secure option, one that, depending on which department you're in, could actually be intellectually stimulating. And for some of them who have aspirations to live and work abroad, the diplomatic corps and the like is seen as a viable career option. So, you know, if I think back to my days of graduating back in 1984, yeah, the civil service was on the list, but I was quite surprised at how strongly it was coming through in the 32 interviews I did. And yeah, they're saying it's all about the allure. So, and that's particularly from one segment who I'm going to share with you. So I talked about work-life balance, and which, you know, for a boomer stroke Xer like me on the border, we hear and we read a lot in the media about, well, the younger generation, it must be about purpose and work-life balance. Not so much what I was hearing. I would characterize it more as money-life balance. And I talked about consorting with the devil, maybe more politely, this idea that they will forego some of their sort of moral aspirations, if you like, if it means that they can accumulate a sufficient level of cash. And if you think, I was intrigued thinking, well, if I'm going to stand up in a room and present the thoughts or insights of 32 people, is that valid? Well, in a qualitative context, I would say, yeah, it's pretty good. But I also, in the research, came across a report from McKinsey done in spring 2022. And if you look, don't worry about the data, but if you look at the headlines, younger people are more concerned than other age groups about employment stability. And over here, Gen Z is less likely than other age groups to expect to retire or to own their own home. And absolutely, those two messages is what I heard in the 32 interviews. So again, a bit of confirmation bias, but I was reassured, if you like, although it's somewhat depressing, but I was reassured that McKinsey, esteemed McKinsey, had come across that. So, the second M, morality. Talking with one of the creative students, got into an interesting discussion. She said, you know, we had a creative trip 6 months ago, and we were really excited because we were going to Barcelona, and I, the creative student, was desperate to see the Sagrada Familia. And so went down there, walked round the corner, and I got this from the internet, not from her, but she said, I was horrified to see Samsung stick a massive poster on the side of the Sagrada Familia. So and she said this is sacrilegious, not just literally, but also metaphorically as well. And I thought this was a really insightful observation that reflected what you're about to see in terms of some verbatims that they also shared. And this was, people who work in advertising have a dubious moral character. Now, I know everybody in the room is fine and upstanding today. And we've heard from other groups this, and it was interesting, after Michael came off stage, I said, it's really interesting, some of your insights, and it's true of the other speakers as well. I've seen and heard it trickle down into the interviews. You know, these big systemic issues that the industry faces, it is trickling down to a 17-year-old, a 13-year-old, people at university. It's an intrusion in my privacy. It's all about profit. Everyone in advertising just sits around saying, let's push this. Well, I know I did a bit of sitting around in my time, but I'm not sure it was that. And this quite insidious one, behind closed doors, they're using your data, said a year 12 at a sixth form college. They know what's going on. They're not stupid. And this leads into my poetic license of imagination. It's this idea that they're basically saying, I've got this phone in my pocket or on the desk or wherever it is, and I'm getting bombarded day in, day out, minute in, minute out by messages. And there's a bit of a double whammy going on. Not only am I getting bombarded, but I'm getting, and I think there's a quote coming up, I'm getting bombarded with rubbish. And it got me thinking, if you like, that anybody old enough like me to remember the Buggles in the 1980s, video killed the radio star. Well, possibly it's a bit, big tech is killing the advertising star. And I hear that, I have heard that coming through. And what's also interesting is they do distinguish at one level between good old-fashioned 30-second TV ad and influencer stuff that they're seeing on TikTok, for example. But equally, at one level, it blurs into, it's advertising is all about, has become KFC doing stupid things. And they talked about, not this particular influencer, unfortunately I've maligned her and just pulled her off a screen grab off my TikTok feed. But, this idea that actually, yes, we in the industry, although I'm not really in the industry now, but we might think puristically, if that's a word, about, okay, here is a 30-second TV ad, and we've seen some great examples earlier today, and here is a TikTok, but they're seeing it eventually all blurring into one morass. And as I've said, a quote came through, why would I want to join an industry that bombards me with rubbish? And that is also true, by the way, although articulated slightly differently, of some of the creative students that I spoke to, who talked about, well, I want to go into publishing, or I want to go into illustration. They see that as, in a way, more worthy. Just reminded me, going back to money, I've done a little bit of research, and I understand, somebody in the room may correct me, that the starting salaries in advertising are about £25,000 to £28,000. I think we heard in America it's $40,000 there or thereabouts. Eversheds last week announced that a newly qualified lawyer will be paid £100,000. I know a very good friend of mine has just retired from a very large law firm, I won't name them, but he said, we start our grads on about 58. After 2 years of qualifying, they're on 120 with 120 bonus. So you're talking grads, and okay, they are, one might say, at a certain level of grad, but potentially after 3 or 4 years, they're earning almost £250,000 as a total package. The advertising industry, I assume, simply can't compete with that. Now, I spoke to 32 students. Anybody in the room who's done segmentation analysis will know that proper, robust segmentation analysis is doing SPSS and regression analysis of 3,000 sample size. So forgive me, I've had a stab at doing a segmentation analysis based on 32 people. And I came to the conclusion that there are 3 groups. There are creative idealists, balanced pursuers, and pragmatic skeptics. The pragmatic skeptics, I think, are a lost cause. They're the people who are going to end up at the top law firms earning £250,000 after 3 years. It is purely about show me the money, and for all the other reasons I've shared. At the other end of the scale are the creative idealists who go, actually, I have a genuine passion to work in an industry where, I believe I can make a difference and not churn out some of the rubbish that I'm being bombarded with. So I would say they are definitely, from a recruitment point of view, identifying worth targeting, and I'll come on to the ideas shortly. And then in the middle are the balanced pursuers who are sort of swaying between, do I want to do something where intellectually and creatively I'm fulfilled, or do I want to do something where I'm going to earn a shed load of money pretty quickly? And I think they can be persuaded to join maybe the lesser well-paid industry. And that leads me to the final M, marketing, case of physician heal thyself. Because I said to them, well, you haven't mentioned to me the advertising industry, why not? And they basically said, because the advertising industry, or agencies within it, don't actually reach out. Maybe in the way that when I was coming out of university, good old-fashioned milk rounds and things like that, I don't know if exist. Now, I appreciate in the audience there may very well be people from agencies who say, we are brilliant at engaging with university undergraduates. So I'm sure that is the case. But quotes like that, UCAS doesn't even put the advertising industry, on their list of prestigious jobs. No teacher ever mentions it as an option. From the creative graphic design student, branding and design agencies come on campus, but not ad agencies. Now, again, I appreciate this is a smaller sample, 5 universities, 32 people, but I can only, don't shoot the messenger, I can only report back what I've heard. And I don't even see them on social media. Now, that said, I did, as part of the research on LinkedIn, come across a couple of interesting examples. One was M&C Saatchi, their open house, and WPP's Creative Tech Apprenticeship. So clearly, the agencies, the holding companies are doing stuff. All I'm saying is that the 32 people I spoke to in depth, they were not aware. So this leads to my final slide, which was, okay, well, what should the ad industry do about it? So we're now above the bumpy clouds, and we're sailing nice and smoothly, so you can release your seatbelts and enjoy a gin and tonic. 10 ideas that came from them. Communicate the variety within the industry. And in fact, a couple of students independently talked about the army recruitment campaign, where they said, actually, the army is great because they show that you can be an engineer. Yes, you can be a soldier, you can be a medic. I'm not saying the ad industry needs more medics, but there is variety. I was an account man and latter time turned planner. People, strategists become creative people. There is great variety in there. Basic thing, greater presence on the media channels that they're using, like TikTok and Instagram. A couple of them mentioned a site I hadn't come across. Anybody in the room who's responsible for recruitment might want to look at these if they're not already doing this. Young Professionals UK, very interesting site, advertising jobs there. Get on campus at the careers fairs. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed with saying this because it is so basic. And again, if anybody's in the room saying, yeah, but we do this, great, not the 32 people I spoke to. Engage with champions. Leslie Hallam, I'm going to embarrass him because I think he's still in the room somewhere. There he is, who also has a role at Lancaster University. His students, I'll spare you blushes here, lauded you and said the great thing about Leslie is he's come from the industry, he understands it, and he can share those insights. But kind of turning it around the other way, find those champions, maybe the ex-industry people on campuses and engage with them. Engage with UCAS. Engage with any of you who are parents and might get invited, as I've been, to do a careers talk at school. Don't go, oh God, I'm knackered on a Thursday night, it's the last thing I want to do. Actually go out there and do it because it will be appreciated. I'm not saying the Times Top 100 Employers is the only great league table to be in, but it was mentioned by a couple of the students. And this, number 9, is really interesting, I think. If we're talking about this insight on safety and security, maybe put out there some celebratory stories of people who've been in the agency world a long time. I had the pleasure of 13 years at Leo Burnett, both here and working in Asia. And longevity at an agency like that was par for the course. So if there are people in agencies who've done their time, celebrate it, communicate it, because what it conveys is this idea of stability and security. And similarly, long-term client relationships, they also do that. And then lastly, and I think it was touched on earlier, this idea of doing maybe not an expose of the industry, but doing branded content. And I will leave the final word to one of the students who came up with this idea. And I think, there have been a couple of bad documentaries about life in advertising agencies. But he said, in a weird way, it'd be massively helpful if there was another Mad Men. And in fact, one of the careers advisors I spoke to said it was Line of Duty did such a good job for police recruitment. So maybe Mad Men wasn't quite in there. So my very final slide, advertising, who cares? What's next? I mentioned the quantitative survey. We will be, through Brian and Nick, help sharing the insights from that. I've got to be in my bonnet about this now, hopefully, as you've seen. I would love to extend this out to, who knows, other countries. Talking with an academic the other day, she said, we are very interested in supporting a paper on this issue. So who knows, she did say, do you want to do a PhD? And I thought, next 3 years, no thanks. But anyway, thank you very much.
I'm going to ask Crispin to stay up because I'm sure we've all got some views and insights on this, and genuinely a good idea, doesn't mind who has it. And I'm going to put my hand up and say, I did my bit because I put Bobby, my niece, into the industry. But, you know, I remember when I was running grad recruitment, it was a buyer's market, completely different now to get people in. So I'm just interested, particularly for any of the larger employers in the room, for any observations, ideas beyond the ones that Crispin has already talked about. Anybody want to add in? Great, thank you very much.
Lovely. Coming to you. If you can say your name and company. Where was the hand?
It's Charlie Macon at Be Addressable. One of the things, we do a lot of stuff around data, around location, and there are some specific universities who are specialists. So, for example, Leeds has virtually all the Leeds students go into locational marketing things. So one of the things we will focus on in the future, we've just started, is concentrating on specific courses and helping them, because it's not so much about, I think when you talk about advertising as a whole, it's almost undigestible, but it's the specific bits and finding the students who are doing things which are appropriate for the industry, and when you talk to those people, they're really interested in it. Yeah. So I think, you know, when you look at it in the whole and you read the messages about it, it can come across as being potentially immoral or whatever. When you actually talk about the specific skills they have and how they fit into the business, it becomes absolutely appropriate and people get really interested about it. So I think it's actually finding, you know, the industry needs to target the right courses for the right people who will fit into it.
I'm going to agree with you only because I'm a visiting professor at Manchester Met, and I would agree absolutely the School of Digital Arts feeds through. You can disagree with me.
No, I wouldn't disagree. In fact, I read Sir John Hegarty's article last week about brains in the advertising industry. My first boss had a degree in Byzantine architecture. Nothing to do, but it was about what I think he and many that I worked with as a junior had curiosity and critical analysis in bucket loads. And I agree, and targeting specific universities will kind of get the creative idealists. And by the way, by creative idealists, I don't mean only they are creative people. I mean they want to work in, they might have a degree in history or Byzantine architecture, but they want to work in this type of environment.
Yeah, and I think when we look at employment in the industry is so broad. There is sufficient breadth, but I think the point that Charlie was making is, you know, low-hanging fruit first. Stephen.
Hi, Stephen Woodford from the Advertising Association. Crispin, fantastic research. I'd love to see the full debrief on that. I just want to draw everybody's attention. We're doing quite a lot of work on this at the moment. There's some brilliant work through something called Media Smart, which we run, which is a media literacy aimed at schools. There's some fantastic work that Omnicom Media Group have done about how we outreach schools better, which we're looking to scale. So if anybody's interested in that, get in touch with us at the AA. We've just launched something called the Advertising and Marketing Training Hub on the Media Leader website. 500 courses aimed at either people, you know, relatively early in their career in the industry, because that's one of the big barriers that we see outside the industry, is that there's not much training. You made the point right at the very start, there's no skill in it. There's a huge amount of skill in it. We need to do a better job marketing all the learning that's in the industry. So again, anybody's interested in that, contact us. And we've got something else coming this autumn, which I won't announce now, but we'll be announcing later to, in effect, address a lot of those issues that you're talking about, Crispin, in terms of we're not high enough profile. No surprise, because we're not doing much communication. Thanks.
Stephen, thank you for that. I'm going to take one last question.
Got
on
one
this.
over here, Stevie. Which one
Yeah.
was it? Is that right?
Sorry, I'm going to this side.
That side? Okay.
Yeah,
Coming.
sorry, we'll do it afterwards.
It would be
But
at the back,
I
wouldn't
think
it?
all of this is tying back into the points that Michael Farmer was making about, on 40 grand US, you can't even afford to rent a flat. So there are some basic business models to solve as well first. So,
Hi, this is Paul Bay. Hi, Crispin. So the big question I've got is whether you think the industry has progressed in terms of bringing in those from state schools in terms of the balance between state and private, because it's been heavily biased, let's be straightforward, been heavily biased towards independent private schools compared to the population at large. Do you think that there are positive strides happening right now in the industry to break that and reach out more to schools and to individuals who've come from state schools?
can I just say that ties in as well. If you can't afford a flat, you're going to could be going to the bank of mummy and daddy, and that ties in as well. But outside of cash,
Yeah. I was going to make that very point that, hence people students at northern universities want to stay up there. Now, I'm not saying the advertising industry is London-centric. In fact, I would say since we worked together at Leo Burnett in it, it's become less London-centric, which is a good thing. And I actually started my career in a Scottish agency. But to answer your question, I think it's more about there is an absolute opportunity to do that. It's just so few. Of the 32 I spoke to, just the low awareness suggests that just a little bit of ratcheting up, maybe with the initiatives that Stephen's just talked about, actually will make a bigger impact because there's nothing there at the moment.
Thank you, Paul, though. And thank you, Crispin. I'm going to move us.